In a grand concert hall dripping with chandeliers and wealth, a black janitor becomes the target of a billionaire's cruel joke. The billionaire mocks him in front of an elite audience, daring him to play the piano. But the janitor's calm silence hints at something deeper, leaving everyone in suspense. "Hey, mop boy, why don't you play us something before you clean the toilets?" The voice cracked through the grand concert hall like a whip, dripping with arrogance. Heads turned, champagne glasses froze midair, and the crowd of tuxedos and glittering gowns erupted in soft laughter. At the center of it all stood Richard Vail, a billionaire investor known as much for his fortune as for his cruelty. With silver hair slicked back and a smug grin plastered on his face, he leaned lazily against the glossy black grand piano, tapping its polished surface with one finger. His target was Daniel Carter, the janitor, mid-50s, black, wiry but strong, dressed in a faded uniform that smelled faintly of cleaning supplies. He had been quietly mopping the marble floor near the back entrance, deliberately invisible, until Vail dragged him into the spotlight. The chandelier light glinted off Richard's Rolex as he smirked. "Come on, everyone. Wouldn't it be hilarious to see the janitor take Mozart's seat?" A ripple of laughter spread across the hall. Men in tailored suits shook their heads. Women in silk gowns covered their mouths, smirking like it was an amusing circus trick. Daniel froze. His hands tightened around the mop handle, but his face remained unreadable. His brown eyes, calm yet wounded, scanned the sea of smirks around him. "I'm working." "Sir," Daniel said quietly, his voice even. "Oh, please," Richard sneered. "You've been working your whole life. Why not entertain us for once?" He gestured dramatically to the piano bench. "Play, and if you impress me, I'll marry you myself." The hall burst into roars of laughter at the mock proposal, champagne spilling over crystal rims. Daniel's jaw tensed, but he didn't answer. From the corner of the room, a young waitress whispered to her colleague, "Why's he doing this?" "That man's just here to clean." Her friend shook her head. "Because it makes him feel bigger." Richard strutted around the piano like a ringmaster. "Well, janitor? What's the matter? Don't know your blacks from your whites?" He tapped the keys with 2 fingers, producing a childish, discordant note. The audience giggled. The humiliation was thick, choking. Every eye in the room bore down on Daniel like a weight. He could walk away, pretend not to hear. But something in Richard's smirk, in the mocking tilt of his chin, rooted Daniel to the spot. Slowly, Daniel set the mop aside. The wooden handle clattered softly against the marble floor. The crowd went silent, surprised. Richard arched an eyebrow. "Oh, the janitor has some backbone?" He gestured theatrically. "Well then, ladies and gentlemen, clear the stage for tonight's headliner, Mr. Mop Bucket Mozart." The laughter was cruel, echoing like glass breaking. Daniel walked toward the piano, each step deliberate. His scuffed shoes squeaked faintly on the polished floor. He didn't look at Richard or at the laughing guests. He looked only at the piano. The grand Steinway sat gleaming under the lights, an instrument worth more than Daniel's entire yearly salary. Its surface reflected the chandeliers above, a mirror of wealth and untouchable artistry. He reached the bench and paused. The room hushed, expecting him to fumble, to embarrass himself, to provide another round of mockery for Richard's entertainment. Richard leaned down, his breath hot with champagne. "Go on then, janitor, play. Or are you only good for scrubbing floors?" Daniel sat down slowly, his back straight, his hands hovering just above the keys. The hall was so quiet now that one could hear the soft hum of the air conditioning. For the first time that evening, Richard Vail's grin faltered. Something about Daniel's posture, his poise, his stillness felt different. The crowd leaned forward, holding their breath. Daniel's fingers trembled once, then steadied. He closed his eyes. The next sound wasn't laughter. It was the first note, a single, pure key that cut through the silence like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. The audience gasped. Daniel's hands began to move, and in that instant before the music fully emerged the mocking billionaire and his glittering crowd realized they might not be witnessing a joke at all. The hall hangs on the edge of revelation, waiting to hear what comes next from the janitor's hands. The note lingered in the air, clean, resonant, alive. It was the kind of sound that didn't just reach ears. It reached hearts. Daniel's hands moved again, touching the keys like they were sacred. A delicate arpeggio spilled into the hall, flowing smooth and effortless. Like water gliding down a mountain stream. The chandeliers above seemed to glow brighter. The crowd, once loud with laughter, sat frozen. A woman's hand slipped from her glass, forgotten, as her eyes widened. "Wait, what?" Someone whispered. Richard Vale stood at the piano's side, his smirk cracking. He had expected clumsy pounding, a discordant mess to fuel more mockery. But the janitor's fingers, long, steady, practiced, moved with elegance. Daniel opened his eyes, steady and calm, his gaze not on Richard or the glittering audience, but on the keys themselves, as though he was conversing with them. Each note cascaded into the next, building a melody both tender and commanding. A fragment of Mozart Piano Sonata No. 16 emerged, clear and confident. The audience gasped again. This is real," muttered an older man in a tuxedo, leaning forward. Richard forced a laugh. "Lucky guess. He must have heard this on YouTube." But his voice was thinner now, strained. Daniel's music rose, filling every corner of the hall, drowning out Richard's arrogance. What was supposed to be humiliation became a performance, each note defying the chains of expectation. He played with a depth that textbooks couldn't teach, pauses where silence spoke louder than sound, crescendos that lifted spines straighter, soft diminuendos that brought tears to the corners of eyes. A woman in the front row clasped her hands to her chest. "Oh my God," she whispered. The waitress from earlier leaned toward her colleague. "Do you hear this? He's not just good. He's brilliant." Her colleague nodded, wide-eyed. "Better than half the pianists I've served here." Richard's jaw tightened. "Don't be ridiculous," he snapped, though no one had spoken to him. "It's just a trick." But the trick wasn't stopping. Daniel's fingers flew now, weaving a storm of notes, commanding the grand piano like a ship at sea. His eyes closed again, lost in the music, his body swaying slightly. Humble yet powerful. And then he shifted. The Mozart dissolved into something else. Something personal. A melody unknown to the audience, rich with pain and hope. The kind of music that comes not from sheet music, but from life itself. It had echoes of gospel hymns sung in tiny churches, the rhythm of blues carried on porches in summer heat, and the fire of jazz born in hidden bars. Every person in the hall could feel it. This was not just performance. It was confession. The janitor was telling a story through keys, one that no insult could erase. Gasps turned into silence. Silence into awe. Awe into trembling chins and wet eyes. Richard shifted uncomfortably. His laughter had died. His cheeks flushed red. For the first time that night, he felt the audience's eyes weren't laughing with him. They were looking through him. Enough! He suddenly barked, his voice slicing into the air like a blade. But Daniel did not stop. If anything, his music deepened, richer, bolder. His shoulders rose, his expression focused, as though he were pouring every insult he had ever endured into this performance, transforming humiliation into beauty. The billionaire slammed, his fist on the piano's lid. "I said enough." Still, the music soared. The audience shifted uncomfortably. Whispers rustled across the room. Why is he stopping him? Can't he hear what we hear? This man is incredible. Richard's eyes darted nervously across the crowd. He could feel it, control slipping, laughter dissolving, the attention he commanded crumbling. And then, as if guided by destiny, Daniel's hand struck one final, thunderous chord. The sound reverberated like a storm breaking open the sky. Silence. Utter silence. The janitor lowered his hands, his chest rising and falling with steady breath. He didn't look at Richard. He didn't look at anyone. He simply sat there, dignified, calm, as though nothing extraordinary had happened. The audience erupted not with laughter, but with applause. Thunderous, standing applause. Crystal glasses rattled on tables as hands clapped furiously. Cheers rang out, whistles pierced the air. Tears rolled freely. The billionaire stood frozen, pale, his attempt at mockery flipped on its head. Daniel turned slowly, his face composed, his eyes quiet, and when his gaze finally met Richard's, the billionaire flinched. The crowd's cheers grow louder, but Richard is left shaking because Daniel's eyes hold something far more powerful than music. The applause thundered through the concert hall, shaking the chandeliers, rattling the crystal glasses, roaring like a storm that no man could silence. But amid the storm, Richard Vail stood frozen, his hand still pressed against the piano lid, his lips parted in disbelief. This was not how it was supposed to go. He had set the stage for humiliation, and instead, he had been humiliated. Daniel sat quietly on the piano bench, not smiling, not bowing, just still. His calmness was louder than the applause. "Who is he?" A voice from the crowd whispered. "He played like he was born with it," said another. "Not born with it," murmured the older man in the tuxedo. "Trained. That's not luck. That's mastery." Richard's ears burned as the whispers rippled, spreading through the sea of tuxedos and silk gowns. What had been mockery minutes ago was now respect, and respect that was slipping away from him. He raised a hand, forcing a laugh, trying to mask his trembling. All right. Settle down, ladies and gentlemen. Cute little show, wasn't it?" His voice cracked on the word cute. "Our janitor here knows a trick or two." "Good for him." The applause faltered. Some sat unsure. Others kept clapping defiantly, eyes locked on Daniel. Richard clapped his own hands loudly, mockingly. Yes. Bravo, mop man. But let's not forget this is my hall, my party. We came here for real music, not whatever that was. His words fell flat. Daniel finally rose from the bench. He didn't look at Richard, didn't look at anyone. He simply picked up his mop, calm and quiet, as though nothing had happened. The waitress from earlier, still holding a tray of untouched champagne, whispered to her colleague, "Did you see the way he played? Like his soul was in it." Her colleague nodded. That wasn't just talent. That was history. The room buzzed with murmurs, growing into speculation. Where did he learn? Why is a man like that working as a janitor? Maybe he used to be. Someone. Richard slammed his glass onto the nearest table. "Enough chatter," he barked. His face flushed red, his composure unraveling. "He's just a janitor. Don't romanticize it." But even as he spoke, the crowd wasn't listening. Their eyes lingered on Daniel, who quietly began to wheel his cleaning cart toward the side exit. His silence, his humility, was louder than Richard's bluster. "Mr. Carter?" The voice cut through the murmurs. It came from the back of the room, a woman in her 60s, elegant, with silver hair and a pearl necklace that gleamed under the chandelier light. She rose slowly from her chair, her eyes fixed on Daniel. "Did you study at Juilliard?" she asked softly. The crowd hushed. Daniel stopped walking. He turned slightly, his gaze meeting hers. His lips parted as if to speak, but then he hesitated. Richard barked a laugh. "Juilliard? Don't be absurd. This man mops floors for a living." But the woman ignored Richard. She stepped forward, her heels clicking against the marble. "Because I swear," she continued, voice trembling with memory, "I saw you play there. Many years ago." "Daniel Carter. Wasn't that your name on the program?" Gasps rippled across the room. Heads swiveled. Whispers grew urgent, sharp. Daniel lowered his eyes. For the first time that evening, his silence wasn't calm, it was heavy, almost painful. Richard's face twisted. "This is ridiculous. Some woman claims she saw him in a recital decades ago, and suddenly we're pretending he's Mozart himself? He's a janitor. That's all." But even as he spat the words, doubt flickered in his eyes. The woman stepped closer. "I never forget a musician. And I will never forget what I heard tonight." The audience stirred again, louder now, their murmurs tinged with excitement. Could it be true? Could the man they had dismissed as invisible, mocked as worthless, once have stood on the world's most prestigious stage? Daniel's hand tightened on the mop handle. He exhaled, steady but heavy, and finally spoke. "I played once," he said softly, his voice carrying despite its quietness. "A long time ago." The crowd gasped again. Richard's fists clenched at his sides. "Nonsense. He's lying." but his voice was drowned by the audience's growing hum of awe, curiosity, and disbelief. The billionaire had lost control, and Daniel Carter, janitor or not, had just reclaimed his name. Whispers about Daniel's hidden past grow louder, and the billionaire feels his empire of mockery beginning to collapse. The air in the concert hall was no longer thick with laughter. It was charged electric with curiosity. Daniel's quiet confession, "I played once. A long time ago," hung like a storm cloud over the room. The woman with silver hair, pearls glinting in the light, took another step forward. Her eyes shimmered as though she were staring not at a janitor, but at a ghost from the past. "I knew it," she whispered. "Daniel Carter, you were the prodigy. They called you the boy who played fire into keys." Gasps swept the audience. Heads turned, whispers rippled. Some pulled out their phones, fingers flying as if searching the name right there in their seats. Richard Vale's face hardened. His hands gripped the back of a gilded chair, knuckles white. "Utter nonsense," he barked. "Old woman's memory playing tricks. He's a janitor. That's all he's ever been." But his voice was weaker now, drowned under the rising tide of murmurs. A younger man in the crowd, hair slicked back, leaned to his companion. "She's right. I remember reading about him." A black pianist, one of the youngest, admitted to Juilliard. "But then—" He trailed off. "But then what?" His companion pressed. The man shook his head. "I don't remember. He disappeared." The mystery only deepened the air of awe. Daniel remained still, one hand on his mop, the other resting at his side. He didn't bask in their curiosity, nor deny it. His silence was his shield, but silence has weight. And in that silence, Richard felt the walls closing in. "Enough!" Richard slammed his palm against the piano lid again. The sharp sound startled the audience. "You are all fools. This is a trick. A janitor cannot be a prodigy. Do you hear yourselves?" But the crowd was no longer with him. Their eyes had shifted. For the first time in years, they weren't fixated on Richard Vale's wealth, his power, his every word. They were fixed on the man he had tried to mock. Daniel Carter. The waitress, still clutching her tray, whispered, "If it's true, why would someone like him be mopping floors?" Her colleague shook his head. "Maybe because the world never let him be more." Richard's chest rose and fell faster now. Panic flickered behind his eyes. He had to regain control. If the crowd fully turned, his grip on this evening, on his reputation, would unravel. He forced a laugh, brittle and sharp. "Fine, if he is this supposed prodigy, let him prove it. Let him play something only a master could play. Something beyond these parlor tricks. Then we'll know the truth." All eyes returned to Daniel. The janitor stood in the glow of the chandelier, his face calm but shadowed with something deeper, weariness perhaps, or an old pain stirred awake. He looked at the piano, then back at Richard. "I have nothing to prove to you," Daniel said softly. The words struck harder than any shout. The audience stirred again. Admiration flickered in their eyes, not just for his talent, but for his refusal to bend. Richard's face twisted. "Coward," he spat. "You hide behind your mop because you're afraid. Afraid you'll fail. Afraid you'll be exposed for the fraud you are." Daniel's gaze lifted slowly, meeting Richard's eyes with quiet fire. "The only fraud here," he said, his voice steady, "is the man who mistakes cruelty for power." A hush swept the room. For the first time in the evening, Richard could not find words. His jaw clenched, his lips pressed thin, but no sound came. The audience's whispers grew bolder now, no longer hiding behind hands. "He's right. Vale humiliated himself. Daniel Carter? I can't believe it's really him." And then from the back of the hall, a voice broke the murmurs. Deep, resonant, commanding. "Mr. Carter." Every head turned. A tall man in a tailored navy suit strode forward, his stride steady, his presence undeniable. His salt and pepper hair and sharp jawline gave him the look of authority, and the small badge pinned discreetly to his lapel drew instant recognition. It was Senator Graham, a man whose word carried weight far beyond the walls of the concert hall. He stopped in front of Daniel, eyes steady. "I remember you too," he said firmly. I was in that audience once. I remember the night you played at Juilliard. The hall shook with your music. The crowd gasped again, louder this time, their murmurs swelling into awe. Richard's breath caught. His empire of mockery was collapsing, and now powerful voices were adding bricks to Daniel's rising throne. Daniel's calm gaze remained on the senator, his silence more dignified than 1,000 speeches. And in that silence, the audience realized this was not just a janitor. This was a man the world had once celebrated and perhaps forgotten too quickly. With the senator's recognition, the pressure mounts. Richard feels his grip slipping, but he's not done yet. He'll find another way to strike back. The senator's words still echoed in the hall. I remember the night you played at Juilliard. It had landed like a hammer blow. Any doubt still clinging to the audience shattered instantly. Gasps had turned into nods, murmurs into declarations. The crowd now spoke Daniel's name with reverence, not mockery. Daniel Carter, the prodigy. How could we have forgotten? And there he stood, quiet, mop in hand, his uniform stained with bleach. The contrast made it all the more powerful. Senator Graham inclined his head, his gaze steady. What happened, Mr. Carter? His voice was gentle, but the question sliced deep. How did a man like you end up here? The crowd hushed, breath held, waiting for an answer. Daniel's lips parted, but before he could speak, Richard Vail lunged forward, his voice booming. This is pathetic. He gestured furiously at the senator. You, of all people, falling for this fairy tale? He's a janitor, a nobody. Don't let him rewrite history in front of us. But Richard's words sounded shrill now, like a man trying to stop the tide with bare hands. Senator Graham's eyes narrowed. Careful, Vail. Respect costs nothing. Laughter rippled through the crowd, this time at Richard's expense. Daniel lowered his gaze. His voice was soft, steady. Life doesn't always go the way it should. I made choices, and others were made for me. The vague answer only stoked the fire of curiosity. Whispers swirled again. What does that mean? Did someone stop him? There's a story here. Richard's mind raced. If the truth came out unchallenged, Daniel would rise higher, and Richard's name would be forever tied to this humiliation. No, he couldn't let that happen. He had to find the cracks, the stains, the real story behind why the prodigy disappeared. Forcing a smile, Richard raised his champagne glass. Well, he sneered, until he explains himself, we're all left guessing. Maybe he just wasn't good enough. The audience booed softly. Some shook their heads. Daniel, unfazed, simply turned back to his cart, resuming his quiet work. But the dignity in his silence spoke louder than any speech. Senator Graham stepped closer, lowering his voice so only Daniel could hear. The world may have forgotten you, but tonight they've remembered. Daniel gave a small nod, his expression unreadable. Later, as the crowd mingled in uneasy clusters, the whispers refused to die. Some guests pulled out old programs, digital archives flashing across their screens, proving that the name Daniel Carter had once glowed across prestigious stages. Yes, here it is. Carnegie Hall, 1989. My God. He was only 17, and then nothing. No more performances. The mystery deepened, fueling awe and suspicion alike. Richard watched from the shadows, his jaw tight, his mind calculating. He slipped away from the crowd, moving toward the private lounge, pulling out his phone. Get me everything you can on Daniel Carter, he hissed into the receiver. Juilliard, Carnegie, whatever. I want to know why he disappeared. Dig up dirt. Scandals, failures, arrests, anything. A pause. I don't care how. Pay whoever you need to. By tonight. He hung up, chest heaving. His eyes narrowed back toward the hall, where Daniel stood surrounded by murmurs of admiration. You won't steal this night from me, Richard muttered. Not you. Not ever. Meanwhile, Daniel wheeled his cart quietly to the edge of the room. His heart beat heavy. He had not wanted this spotlight, this exposure. For years he had hidden behind the silence of routine, behind mops and buckets, safe in invisibility. Now the past was clawing back. His hands, the same hands that once drew standing ovations, tightened around the mop handle. He could still feel the piano keys under his fingertips, still hear the ghost of the music he had poured out, but with the memory came something else. Shadows. The faces of men in suits, the sting of words whispered in back rooms, contracts ripped apart, promises broken because of the color of his skin. He swallowed hard, blinking away the storm of memory. Not here, not now. But he knew one thing: Richard wouldn't stop. And when men like Richard dug, they always dug deep enough to hurt. Back in the lounge, Richard's phone buzzed. A message lit the screen. Found something. Call me. Richard's lips curled into a smile. Finally, a weapon. He slipped the phone back into his pocket, straightened his jacket, and returned to the hall with a new fire in his eyes. Daniel Carter might have won the applause. But Richard Vale was preparing to win the war. Richard has found a lead into Daniel's past, ready to twist it into a weapon, and Daniel senses the shadows he's tried to escape are closing in. The hall buzzed with low conversation, still electric from the unexpected performance. Guests clustered in groups, whispering Daniel Carter's name like it was a secret rediscovered dot in the corner. Senator Graham stood speaking softly to Daniel, a protective presence at his side. But Daniel's eyes were far away, staring into a past only he could see. Then Richard Vale returned. His steps were sharp, his smirk restored. He clutched his phone like a dagger hidden in plain sight. "Ladies and gentlemen," he called, his voice booming across the room. Conversations faltered. Eyes turned. The billionaire thrived on attention, and now it was his again. "Before you all canonize our janitor into sainthood," Richard sneered, "I thought I'd do a little digging. Because unlike some of you, I prefer facts over fairy tales." The crowd stiffened. Daniel's brow furrowed slightly, though his lips remained sealed. Richard lifted his phone, scrolling with mock ceremony. "Ah, yes. Daniel Carter. Juilliard prodigy. Carnegie Hall sensation." Until he paused, savoring the tension. He vanished. Why? Whispers rippled through the hall. Richard's grin sharpened. Because he cracked. Couldn't handle the pressure. Froze on stage, stumbled through a performance, humiliated himself in front of critics. And then poof, gone. A failure hiding behind a mop. Gasps broke out. Heads turned, eyes darted between Richard and Daniel. "Is that true?" Someone murmured. "I never heard that. Could that be why he disappeared?" Richard stepped closer to the piano, leaning against it like a conquering general. "So yes, he can tinkle out a tune or two for nostalgia. But let's not kid ourselves. This man isn't Mozart. He's a broken has-been who never was." The cruelty of his words slashed the air. Daniel stood still, his face unreadable. Inside, the memories returned sharper than glass the night his career cracked. The bright lights, the unforgiving critics, the tremor in his hands, the silence that followed. And yes, the humiliation. But Richard wasn't done. "Oh, and let's not forget," he continued, his voice dripping venom, "the whispers of why certain doors closed for him. Too much pride. Too many demands. Couldn't play the game the way the industry wanted. And now?" He gestured with a sweeping flourish. "Now he's mopping floors for men like me." The hall was silent, the audience torn between awe and discomfort. Some glanced at Daniel with pity, others with doubt. Senator Graham's jaw tightened. "You've said enough, Vale." But Richard smirked. "Have I? Or are we finally telling the truth?" Daniel's fingers flexed against the mop handle. He could feel every eye on him, waiting for denial, for anger, for collapse. Instead, he lifted his gaze, steady and calm. His voice was quiet but clear. "Yes, I failed." The hall froze. Daniel's words rang with a simple, unflinching honesty that pierced deeper than Richard's sneer. "I failed on a stage the world was watching. I froze. I stumbled. And the critics tore me apart." His eyes swept across the hall, meeting the stares of silk and diamonds. "But that doesn't erase the music. And it doesn't erase me." For a moment, silence reigned. Richard blinked, caught off guard. "So you admit it? You're nothing." But Daniel shook his head. "No, I admit I am human." "Something you've never learned to be." The audience stirred again. Heads nodded. Whispers carried a different weight now. Respect. Richard's smirk faltered. Respect? He scoffed. For a man who choked? Senator Graham stepped forward, his voice firm. Every great artist has stumbled, Vale. What separates them from men like you is that they rise again. Even in failure, Daniel Carter's music tonight has done more than your fortune ever will. Applause scattered through the hall, small at first, then louder. The tide was turning again. Richard's jaw clenched. His weapon had struck, but instead of killing, it had revealed something raw, human, and stronger than his cruelty. Daniel lowered his eyes again, calm but heavy. The scars were open, but he would not let them be chains. Richard, however, was not done. His eyes glinted with something darker, more desperate. If humiliation and failure weren't enough, he would dig deeper. He would find something that could not be redeemed. Richard vows silently to uncover the darkest piece of Daniel's past, determined to crush him completely, even as the crowd begins to admire Daniel's resilience. Richard Vale couldn't sleep. The echo of applause for Daniel's resilience gnawed at him like acid. He had tried humiliation. He had dug into Daniel's failure. Yet instead of crumbling, the janitor had turned confession into dignity. That night, back at his penthouse, Richard scrolled through archives, old newspapers, whispered forums. His eyes narrowed when he found a headline buried in time. Juilliard pianist. Daniel Carter walks out after contract dispute. Richard's smile returned. This was better than failure. This was defiance. By morning, he was armed with fresh ammunition. The gala's second night opened with even more glitter. Guests returned, still buzzing from the unexpected drama of the previous evening. Cameras lingered near the piano, waiting for another miracle or another scandal. Richard stepped forward, once again commanding the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, he began smoothly, I promised the truth. And I've found it. All eyes turned. Even Daniel, sweeping near the back of the hall, paused. Richard held up a tablet. After that infamous failure, Daniel Carter didn't simply fade away. No, he walked out. He turned his back on the very institution that gave him everything. Why? Because he refused to play by their rules. Because he thought he was too important to listen. Gasps echoed. Richard let the silence build. Documents show, he continued, that he rejected a major recording contract. Demanded control. Demanded respect he hadn't earned. And when the doors closed, he cried foul. He blamed the system. He blamed everyone but himself. Whispers rippled through the audience. Is that true? Sounds like arrogance. Maybe he wasn't as innocent as he seemed. Richard's voice hardened. So let's not be fooled by a sob story. This man sabotaged his own career. And now he hides in a uniform, milking your pity. He turned to Daniel. Tell them I'm wrong. Tell them you weren't just a bitter child who couldn't accept the rules. All eyes fixed on Daniel. The hall was heavy with tension. Daniel set down his mop slowly, like a soldier laying down a weapon. He stepped forward, his face calm but grave. You want the truth? His voice carried, steady as a hymn. Then let's speak it. The crowd leaned closer. Yes, I walked away from Juilliard. Yes, I rejected a contract. But it wasn't arrogance. It was survival. Murmurs rose. Richard folded his arms, smirking. Daniel's gaze swept across the glittering hall. They offered me a contract that paid me less than half of what they gave my peers. They demanded I play the crowd favorites, ragtime, jazz, because that's what they thought a black pianist should sell. Not Chopin. Not Mozart. Not Liszt. They wanted my skin to be part of the performance. Gasps, sharper this time. Daniel's voice trembled, but not from fear. When I asked for fairness, they laughed. When I asked for respect, they told me to be grateful. And when I refused to bow, they shut the doors. Not because I lacked talent. Not because I lacked discipline, but because I dared to demand dignity. The hall went still. Daniel's eyes locked with Richard's. So yes, I walked away. Because I would not let my gift be twisted into their stereotype. I chose silence over chains. A long silence followed. Then applause. Quiet at first, then louder, breaking like thunder. Some guests rose to their feet. Others wiped tears. The shift was unmistakable, what Richard thought would bury. Daniel had revealed a deeper injustice. Richard's face darkened. He had expected shame. Instead, he had unmasked systemic racism in front of New York's elite, and it was they who looked guilty, not Daniel. Senator Graham spoke firmly, his voice cutting through the applause. That is not arrogance, Vale. That is integrity. Something you could never understand. The audience turned against Richard, their whispers sharp now, critical. Richard's jaw tightened, his grip on the tablet white-knuckled. You think this makes him a hero? He spat. He's still a janitor. Still beneath us. But even as he said it, Richard felt the ground shift beneath him. He had exposed a truth, but the truth was not on his side. Daniel lowered his eyes again. Humility in his posture, but strength in his presence. He had bled before them, and somehow it made him untouchable. Richard storms away, vowing that if the past won't destroy Daniel, he will drag him into the present using power, wealth, and influence in ways Daniel can't fight. The applause still echoed in Richard Vale's ears long after it had faded. He paced his penthouse like a lion, replaying Daniel's calm words over and over. Each time the crowd's cheers returned, louder in his memory, sharper against his pride. Daniel Carter was not supposed to win. Richard stared out at the skyline, teeth clenched. If history and scandal couldn't bury the janitor, then money would. The next evening, whispers ran through the gala hall before the music even began. Guests murmured, eyes darting toward Daniel with newfound respect and curiosity. But an undercurrent of tension spread, invisible but palpable. Daniel noticed it too. Conversations hushed when he passed. Faces turned away, not out of scorn, but out of fear. Senator Graham caught his arm. They're moving against you, he murmured. Daniel frowned. Who? The senator's eyes flicked toward the upper balcony, where Richard leaned casually against the railing, phone in hand. Vale. He's been calling sponsors. Board members. Whispering poison. The kind of poison money makes lethal. Daniel's chest tightened. He had expected mockery, insults. He hadn't expected this, the quiet knives of influence. At dinner, the chairman of the gala cleared his throat nervously. Mr. Carter, we appreciate your service to this event. Truly. But perhaps it's best you step back. The spotlight is disruptive. Disruptive? Graham snapped. The man only played music. Music that's attracting headlines we didn't plan for, the chairman said, avoiding Daniel's gaze. Mr. Vale is a major benefactor. He hesitated, then swallowed hard. He feels the dignity of the gala is being compromised. Daniel sat silent, his face unreadable. Graham slammed his palm on the table. Dignity? You're bowing to a man who spits on it. The chairman lowered his voice. You must understand. Our sponsors, our donors, they matter. The words hung heavy. They didn't need to say more. Money mattered more than justice, more than truth. Daniel stood, his movements deliberate, controlled. If my presence disrupts, then I will not force it. His voice carried no bitterness, only quiet finality. Whispers filled the room. Some pitied him, some applauded his grace. But most stayed silent, choosing safety over solidarity. Later that night, Daniel walked the empty hall, mop in hand once more. The piano stood under the lights, gleaming, yet distant now. From the shadows, Richard emerged, smug and unhurried. Back where you belong, he said softly. Cleaning up after the real players, Daniel didn't look up. Power is a fragile thing, Mr. Vale. Built on sand, Richard smirked. Sand? No, money. And money doesn't vanish. You'll be gone from this hall by morning. I've spoken with the board. You're finished here. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. You can play your sad songs all you want, janitor. But without a stage, no one will hear them. And without ears, music is nothing. Daniel finally looked up, eyes steady. Music doesn't need ears. It needs truth. And truth doesn't belong to you. For the first time, Richard's smirk faltered, just slightly. but he covered it with a sneer. By dawn, the news spread. Daniel Carter had been quietly dismissed from the gala staff. No official statement, only whispers. Some staff avoided him as he packed his modest belongings. Others offered small nods of respect, but none dared speak openly. Senator Graham arrived, furious. This is cowardice. This is complicity. Daniel closed the box of supplies, calm but heavy. It's the way of power. They've chosen silence. Graham's voice cracked with anger. And what do you choose? Daniel looked toward the piano, now closed, its keys hidden. His silence carried both pain and resolve. Meanwhile, Richard celebrated privately. He had restored order, silenced rebellion, crushed the flicker of resistance before it grew. Or so he thought, because what he didn't see, what no amount of money could erase, were the murmurs growing, louder beyond the gala walls. Guests whispered to journalists. Staff whispered to family. A story was taking root, one Richard could not control, and at the center of it stood Daniel Carter, not erased, but remembered. As Daniel leaves the gala in quiet dignity, an unexpected figure approaches him outside, offering a stage far bigger than Richard ever feared. The night air outside the gala was cool, sharp against Daniel's skin. He stepped onto the stone steps, his small box of belongings in hand. For a moment, he simply stood there, the sound of muffled laughter and clinking glasses drifting from the grand hall behind him. It was over. Again. But before he could take another step, a woman's voice called out, "Mr. Carter?" He turned. A tall woman in a sleek black coat approached, her eyes alight with urgency. She was in her 40s, composed, but her tone carried weight. "I'm Evelyn Cross," she said quickly, "editor of the New York Chronicle. I was in the audience last night. I saw everything." Daniel's brow furrowed. And, she said firmly, "I think the world deserves to hear your story. Not whispered in corners. Not buried in contracts. On record. On stage." Daniel hesitated, the scars of silence heavy on his shoulders. "Why now?" "Because truth has a moment," she replied. "And last night you created one." Behind them, the gala's golden doors closed with a thud. Daniel looked at them, then at Evelyn. For years he had been locked out of doors like these. But maybe some doors weren't worth reopening. Within 48 hours, Evelyn's paper released a feature story, "The Silence of Daniel Carter: How Racism Stole a Prodigy's Stage." The article spread like wildfire. Photos of Daniel at Juilliard at Carnegie Hall resurfaced alongside his quiet image in a janitor's uniform. The contrast was stark, heartbreaking, undeniable. The internet took hold. Hashtags emerged. Hashtag Play For Us Daniel. Old recordings of his Juilliard performances circulated, stunning new generations who had never heard his name. The world asked, where had this genius gone? At the same time, Richard Vail's name began appearing in less flattering headlines. Billionaire heckles, janitor turned pianist, mockery at gala sparks backlash. Clips of Richard sneering at Daniel circulated, paired with Daniel's calm replies. The optics were devastating. Richard raged in his office, slamming his phone onto the desk. "This is spin, lies. I'll sue them all." His assistant shifted nervously. "Sir, it's not just the press. Some of our investors are concerned. They don't like the attention." Richard's eyes narrowed. "They'll fall in line. They always do." But deep inside, for the first time, he felt something unfamiliar fear. Meanwhile, Evelyn arranged something bolder than words. She invited Daniel to perform at a public concert in Central Park. Free. Open to anyone. Daniel balked at first. "A park? I'm no longer." "You are exactly what the city needs," Evelyn insisted. "Not in a hall where tickets cost thousands. Here, among the people. Let your music be heard." Daniel stood at the edge of the empty stage, the city skyline glowing beyond. He ran his fingers across the keys of a grand piano set beneath the open sky. His heart pounded, not with fear this time, but with something old, something buried. Hoped out. When the night came, thousands gathered. Families, students, workers, artists. They filled the grass and pathways, holding signs. "Play for us, Daniel." Daniel stepped into the lights. A hush swept over the crowd. His hands hovered above the keys, trembling only for a breath. Then he played. The music soared into the night, spilling beyond the park, echoing against skyscrapers, drifting into the windows of taxis and apartments. A symphony of resilience, grief, and grace. The audience wept. They cheered. They roared, and cameras caught it all. Live streams lit up across social media. Millions watched from their screens, mesmerized. High above in his penthouse, Richard watched the performance on a muted television. The sight of Daniel commanding not just a hall, but an entire city, tightened like a fist around his throat. He turned away from the screen, furious. Enough. If they want war, I'll give them war. He picked up his phone and dialed. Pull every string. Contacts in City Hall, the Symphony Board, media networks. Shut this man down before he becomes unstoppable. His reflection glared back from the glass window. For the first time, he no longer looked untouchable. Down in the park, as the last notes faded, the crowd erupted in thunderous applause. Daniel bowed his head humbly, tears in his eyes. Evelyn leaned in from the side of the stage. This is only the beginning. Daniel looked at the sea of faces, their cheers rising like a tide. For years his music had been silenced. Now it was louder than ever. Richard, cornered and enraged, plots his final and most dangerous move, one that could destroy not just Daniel's music, but his very life. Richard Vale had spent his life bending cities to his will. He had bought silence, manufactured truth, erased enemies. But never had one man haunted him like Daniel Carter. And now, after the Central Park concert, Richard felt cornered. "This ends tonight," he muttered, pacing his penthouse. He had called in favors from City Hall, leaned on media contacts, threatened sponsors. His final move would crush Daniel before his legend could take root. The next evening, Daniel was invited to perform at a charity gala broadcast nationwide. Invitations were rushed out, fueled by the wildfire of his Central Park performance. Millions would watch. Richard seethed, but also saw an opportunity. Cameras meant witnesses, and if Daniel slipped, if Richard planted doubt, the fall would be catastrophic. The night of the gala glittered with chandeliers and sequined gowns. The ballroom pulsed with anticipation, a grand piano at its center. Daniel arrived quietly, wearing a simple suit. He ignored the whispers, the flashes of cameras. His calm was steady, but his eyes betrayed the storm within. Backstage, Evelyn touched his arm. "He's here," she whispered. Daniel nodded. Of course Richard was here. Like a shadow refusing to fade. As Daniel approached the piano, Richard stepped forward, interrupting. His voice boomed across the hall. "Before we hand the stage to a janitor with a sob story," Richard declared, "the public deserves truth." The audience tensed. Camera zoomed. Richard held up a stack of papers. "Here are records of Mr. Carter's dismissal from Juilliard. Notes from critics. Proof of his so-called breakdown. Proof that his career ended not because of injustice, but because he was never strong enough to begin with." Gasps, murmurs. The trap was set. Richard's grin widened. "So before you crown him a hero, ask yourselves, would Mozart have walked away? Would Beethoven have quit? No, this man is not a genius. He is a quitter." The room fell silent. All eyes turned to Daniel. Daniel placed his hands gently on the piano, then lifted them. His voice, calm and resonant, filled the silence. "You hold papers of my failure. I hold music of my soul. Which one will history remember?" He sat, fingers hovering. For a long heartbeat, nothing moved. Then he played. Not a polished recital. Not flawless scales. But something raw, aching, alive. A composition born of nights in silence, of floors mopped, of dignity refused to be broken. The notes told his story, his triumphs, his scars, his survival. They rose higher, faster, then sank into aching lows until the room itself seemed to breathe with him. Tears streamed down faces. Guests clutched hands. Even hardened critics leaned forward, eyes shining. And through it all, Richard stood frozen, his papers trembling in his fist. The music drowned his words, tore through his lies, stripped him bare. When the final chord faded, silence hung heavy, sacred, unbroken. Then came the applause. Roaring, relentless, unstoppable. Reporters surged forward. Cameras flashed. Daniel Carter. Prodigy returns. But amid the thunder, another sound cracked through. Richard's voice, desperate now. This proves nothing. He shouted, waving his papers wildly. He's a fraud. But his voice broke. And for the first time, no one listened. Security approached quietly. One of the gala directors whispered something into Richard's ear. His face drained of color. His investors had pulled support. His name was now poison in headlines. Richard stumbled back, papers scattering like confetti no one wanted. Evelyn stepped onto the stage, standing beside Daniel. What you witnessed tonight, she said into the microphone, was not just music. It was justice. And justice, when silenced too long, comes back louder than ever. The audience rose in a standing ovation. Daniel bowed his head humbly, tears streaking his cheeks. He had not shouted. He had not fought. He had simply played. And the truth had thundered louder than any accusation. Later, outside the hall, reporters clamored. Fans crowded, chanting his name. But Daniel slipped away quietly, walking into the night. Senator Graham caught up, clapping his shoulder. You didn't just win tonight. You changed everything. Daniel smiled faintly. I didn't win. The music did, behind them. The headlines flashed across screens. Billionaire veil disgraced. Janitor to genius. The return of Daniel Carter. Music of justice rings out, and somewhere in the city, Richard Vail sat alone, drowning in silence. For the first time, his wealth couldn't buy applause. His voice carried no weight. His empire, built on arrogance, had collapsed under the power of a single man's dignity. Meanwhile, Daniel Carter sat at a small upright piano in his modest apartment. His fingers brushed the keys softly, quietly, not for a crowd, not for the world, just for himself, and the music, unshackled at last, played on.